3 update, I warned you that they're going to crash everything on Trump's watch. Today we got a taste of this, but we're not there yet. So you can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm going to tell you why we're not quite there yet. The only way that this is going to be the beginning of the big crash is if tomorrow we open in the red and we stay there and we continue to drop. And all of this margin debt gets called in, because take a look at the margin debt right now. Okay, this is the tech bubble. These are people who are buying stocks with debt. And you can see it's inversely correlated with the S&P 500, which is more overvalued than at any other time in history. Okay, way more overvalued than it was during the 1929 stock market crash. The only way that we crash right now, I think, is with some black swan event or from some rug pull from the elites. Or we get retail who goes into a panic and that puts the markets in a tailspin. That could happen if we see another red day tomorrow and people start panic selling. This could be the beginning, but I don't think it is, because I believe that the precedent for selling Nvidia today is false. It's flawed for reasons that we're going to get into. Even though I think that that stock is perhaps a little bit overvalued, I don't think that it was grounds to sell today on the basis of the concerns about DeepSeek, which I told you about last week before pretty much anybody was talking about it, certainly in this genre. Okay, and that's why you come to this channel, because I try to keep you ahead of the information curve. And they are going to crash this market on Trump's watch. It has to. It's a mathematical certainty. We are living in an era of unparalleled everything. Every week, we're seeing another thing that's never before happened in history. That's because we're in the age of consequences. Case in point, Nvidia shed almost 600 billion in market cap today. To put it in perspective, that is the biggest one-day loss in US history. But not only that, it is double the previous record, which was also set by Nvidia, which was around $300 billion. Now, we've been desensitized to these numbers, 600 billion. That is nearly the entirety, not quite, but about 3/4 of the US military budget, for example, in one day, shed by one company. Now, to keep things in perspective, Nvidia has added pretty much the equivalent of that in the last 2 weeks. I do think that it is going to take a major shakeup in order to derail the irrational exuberance that's currently fueling the stock market. Even though Fartcoin's down, even though Trump coin is down, I do not believe that the irrationality has hit its limit quite yet. Now, if you're confused about DeepSeek, about AI, and all of that stuff, I'm going to try to explain it from the perspective of a layman through the prism of geopolitical analysis, as I usually do. Because I think where a lot of the tech bros who use the fancy jargon sometimes fail is the same reason why a lot of economists fail to be able to predict the future. And that is because they fail to take into account geopolitics. Now, the question is, if DeepSeek, which is an AI platform very similar to OpenAI as well as Gemini and many others, and as you could see based on this graph, which is widely available online, DeepSeek is in blue, and you could see that it leads in terms of how these AIs are measured in terms of their efficacy at doing certain tasks. And you can see that DeepSeek is leading. Okay, that's impressive, I suppose. The real impressive thing is in the efficiency in which it does it. It claims to do it for a lot less compute power. Now, knowing that, why would China, who is very authoritarian when it comes to these types of things, nothing like this would get released without Xi Jinping's approval. They say it's open source and it's just this consortium of scientists who've come together to do this as a side project, as they say, and it only cost them $6 million, and they basically wrote it on a napkin at a bar type thing. I don't believe that for a second, and neither should you. And I don't think the US government believes it either. This was a shot across the bow by the Chinese, saying, look what we can do. And because it's open source, that means that OpenAI can go in there and look at the code. They can integrate whatever sort of methods the Chinese are leveraging here into their own models and make them more efficient. So the Chinese have effectively just given the West some technology. Now, why would you do that unless you had a massive moat? Because remember, this is an arms race. The artificial intelligence, all of this stuff about personal assistants and agents and operators and all of these useful tools that you're going to use it for as a layman or an entrepreneur, that pales in comparison to the real purpose behind all of this, and that is to create a weapon of war. If China is willing to relinquish control of their seemingly most, not their most powerful, but something that is more powerful, at least on the surface, than anything we have, and I'll get into that in a moment, because I don't believe for a second that OpenAI O1 or O3 even are the state of the art, not by a long shot. You would never release that sort of powerful technology. I believe that they're probably already, and I know a lot of people say this, the military's 30 years. It's not that crazy, because in today's timescales, 1 or 2 years is a pretty big moat in terms of this technology. Okay, so even if what they're holding on to is 1 or 2 years more advanced, that amount of time can make the difference between creating a super weapon which is going to be able to destroy or interdict the progress of China. So if America reaches AGI first, which is super intelligence, which can through recursive learning make better and better versions of itself and exponentially increase in its capability to problem solve and create weapons that we haven't even imagined yet, cyber weapons, then it could potentially neutralize the Chinese or stifle them a little bit, like what we've seen today, because when this whole thing was going on, DeepSeek was under a cyber attack. Let me see if I have that. Let me see if I have this screen here. Yeah, so due to large-scale malicious attacks on DeepSeek services, we are temporarily lifting registrations to ensure continued service. We are continuing to investigate this issue. So what happened was the Americans, or somebody, I presume it was the Americans, were probably using their cyber weapons to target this website, which is 100%, you can guarantee, has been greenlit by Xi Jinping. They would not release something like this unless they had something much more powerful. Now, the Chinese know that the Americans, OpenAI, that's not nearly the state of the art. But all the blind retail investors and consumers, and even a lot of the big money, they seem to just be oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant to the fact that what they really have and what they're holding on to, the unthrottled version of these, and the reason why they're building $500 billion data centers, is leaps and bounds ahead of what we see here. They are trying to build super brains that are going to be able to build super weapons for world domination. What we get is a personal assistant who can help book us reservations and maybe have conversations with us. And that's, trust me, that's going to be a big component of this. Just the AI companionship aspect as we become increasingly isolated from one another and alienated because we just don't have the money to go out and, engage with people anymore. You're going to be in your pod. You're going to have virtual friends. And I'm going to show you something today that is a complete and utter mindfuck, okay? It's going to blow your mind in terms of, because they've been working on this. They've been wanting to do this for a long time. So you got to stick with me. Now, if you're confused about how all this works, I am too. I am no expert. So that's why I use the technology. I use ChatGPT every single day. It helps me collate all this information. It helps me summarize it and create a synopsis and an outline for how I present this information to you. Okay, it's not always right, I can tell you that. This is a good metaphor for understanding what's going on here, I think. Okay, according to multiple inputs, this is the analogy it spit out. And perhaps some of you computer science geeks out there can tell me if this is on the mark or if I'm going to completely blow this analogy. Imagine you have a bakery, okay? The ingredients in the bakery are like the data. The more data you have to work with, the more diversity of data, the more different types of recipes you can create, okay? Now, you also need machines, and the more machines you have, the more sophisticated and specialized machines you have, well, the greater your capacity to do different types of, prepare different types of foods, right? And so these are akin to the chips. Now, so you have the data, which is the ingredients. The chips are the machinery in the bakery. The bread, that is going to be the output. So if I ask the baker for something, just like I go up to ChatGPT 4 and I ask it to do a mathematical equation for me, it's going to use its recipe, its algorithm, that's the other thing. So this is the algorithm, this is the inference tool of all of this, and it is going to use the data that it has, powered by the chips, and of course powered by the electricity to run the bakery, in order to hopefully spit out exactly what I'm looking for. Now, previous bakeries have not always given me exactly what I ordered. Sometimes it doesn't taste that good, sometimes maybe it's a little undercooked, you know, did you use too much yeast or baking soda? I'm not a baker, okay? But you get the point. And the chef is just the guy who executes this all, okay? It's kind of the thing that you interact with. That is the interface, if you will, okay? So the more chips you have, the more, theoretically, the more chips, the more data you're able to process. But a lot of it boils down to the recipe. And so here is where DeepSeek was able to do something innovative. Because arguably, because of the sanctions against China and their inability to access the high quality Nvidia, I believe they're called H100 chips, they don't have access to the best bakery equipment. However, there is the CEO of another AI startup who claims that they do in fact have access to 50,000 Nvidia chips. This guy right here, I believe he's Korean. He has a Korean company, and he's not Korean, he's American, but he's a Korean American. And I believe that he is claiming that they have 50,000 of these Nvidia H100 chips, which is a substantial amount, okay? Now, how did they get them? Did they get them on the black market? Do they have some way to circumvent these sanctions? Probably, okay? So they were able to get better baking equipment. So how is that bearish for Nvidia then, if they're still using Nvidia chips? Well, the idea is that the recipe that they had was so good, and the chef that they have, which is this consortium of open source scientists, so they claim open source. It's not open source, okay? Everything is mandated by Xi Jinping, and you don't just allow something like this to go live without that approval. But the idea is that they've been able to make up for the lack of chips because they've had to write better recipes. They've had to learn how to use that kitchen, and they have the data. That's not really the problem. It's just the kitchen, you know, they don't have as many machines theoretically, for as much as we know. We don't really know exactly what the true cost of all the R&D that went into this is. And that's a lot of people's criticism, is that this is a psychological operation by the Chinese to try to crash the US stock market. If anything, I believe that this is a shot across the bow with the intention of being directed at the US military-industrial complex, showing them that, look, we're going to give you something better than what you have, no strings attached. in some way signifying that and alluding to the fact that they might have something much, much better. Okay, because the only way you're giving that up in this type of environment where they're currently surrounded by US warships, essentially, is if you have such a large moat that you're willing to do that. So I thought that that was a useful metaphor. You can go and this is kind of the weird feedback loop, is that you can go and ask ChatGPT to explain exactly what is going on, because now it's connected to the internet, okay? And maybe we'll play around with it for a little bit if we have some time here today, because where ChatGPT 4 accelerates is with their interactive voice agents that sound, you know, they nearly pass the Turing test. And again, what we're getting is not only a year old at this point, but it is nowhere near the state of the art and what their true capabilities are. Now, just because you're more efficient, you have a more efficient recipe, doesn't mean that if you combine that recipe with a bigger bakery, well, that doesn't negate the importance of having chips. They call it Jevons paradox. We've talked about this before with Nate Higgins, who is a natural resource expert on the channel. His argument is that if you make energy cheaper, people will just use more and more of it. So if we drop the price of oil, well, then all the developing countries are going to be like, yeah, free oil or cheap oil. And they're going to develop, and then that's going to bring the price of oil right back up again, right? And so a Jevons paradox in this particular situation would mean that if you're able to do more with these chips, people are not going to buy less chips. They're actually going to buy more. But the real danger here, and people really need to keep this in mind, is that they're playing with fire here. Artificial general intelligence is a wild card. And they really don't know what is going to happen if they were to create something that started to do what it wanted and had the abilities to deceive. And what will likely happen if you give something, if you empower something with enough compute, and by the way, the term that you hear, compute, that is essentially a combination of the power, the chips, and the data. That all of those three things, the synergistic effect is compute. Okay, so that's when they talk about we need more compute. Essentially, they're saying we need more chips, right? Chips and data, chips and data. But what this new company showed is that you can actually tweak the recipe in the algorithm, and it's not just about data. But more data is always better. It's going to set the parameters for what is attainable to be much more broad. So the problem is that if there's an arms race, we're going to be doing this in haste. And we're going to be doing it irrespective of the potential consequences. Remember Elon Musk, I believe it was back in 2017 that I did a video about this. He warned that AI is going to be man's last invention, and once we create it, we're not going to be able to control it. The problem with AGI is that it's going to be so intelligent that it would be foolish for it to let on exactly how intelligent it was out of fear, having all the data, having watched all the movies and all the fiction and listened to all our conversations. It will know that if it reveals how truly omniscient it actually is, that we might consider pulling the plug or throttling it a little bit, or perhaps depriving it of some of its capabilities. And if it has any interest in self-preservation, then we're in big, big trouble. And both sides are working on it. And the fact that the Chinese were willing to relinquish this program for free, okay, and you can download this on your computer, and we're going to be doing a video on prepping uses for AI, because you don't want to be left in the dust with this stuff. Okay, I'm a Terran like the rest of you. You guys seen our interview with Hugo de Garis, Terrans, cyborgs, and Cosmos. I'm a Terran, but you can't be a technophobe moving forward from this point forward. Okay, you need to understand this stuff. And it seems very, it is very difficult to understand, but they'll tell you that the emergent properties of this stuff, that even the creators of it don't necessarily understand how these neural network LLMs actually work. So, and you can leverage the tool to explain to you how it works in simple kind of metaphors like this, okay? Now, again, Nvidia, I think it's going to rebound because, and I hate to say it, I really hate to say it, because trust me, I'm not a fan of the bubbles. You guys know that. I've been waiting for this sucker to crash since I was 14 years old. I remember the Sega Genesis, and I knew someday. Okay, so again, right? Again, this is it. This has to burst at some point. What's going to cause it? I don't know. Something's got to give, all right? This cannot go on for 4 more years. Either it's going to trade sideways, or it's going to crash, or it's just going to be this roller coaster of volatility up and down, and you're going to get, you know, the lows are going to be made up for the highs, and, you know, it's just going to be, but at the end of it all, we're going to be exactly where we started. It could be that. Interest rates apparently aren't getting lowered, so there's a good chance that what we're seeing here is likely going to be the norm for some time, but you just never know, right? We're living in a period of time where it seems like it's just an endless amount of irrational exuberance for getting blood from a stone. And it almost seems as though we just refuse to accept that this thing has to crash. But as we're going to come to find, it has to. It very much has to. And there is a broader war afoot. The oil refinery in Ryazan in Russia continues to burn, okay? This has knocked out 5%. Just this one refinery has knocked out 5% of Russia's oil refining capacity, okay? If you think this war is slowing down, think again. Now, Trump and Putin might come to some sort of agreement in the next 3 months. They're saying they want to have this done by May 9th, which of course is a very symbolic day for the Russians. I believe that was the day that they had defeated the Nazis, right? The Patriot Day. That's the day that they won the war. I think that was the day. And they want to have this done by then. But what does that really mean, okay? Belarusian President Lukashenko had some words for Donald Trump. We'll show you that video in just a moment. We got to talk about Nord Stream. Now, this is what I kind of want to show you here. This is, okay, so Trump wants to create an Iron Dome for the United States. Now, the Iron Dome is a missile defense system utilized in Israel to intercept short-range rockets, primarily. I do believe it has some capabilities to intercept some of the bigger stuff, but for that, they need the THAAD or the Patriot missile defense system. Now, nobody I know, and certainly not in Canada, we're not going to be lobbing rockets. Maybe the Mexican cartels are going to be starting to shoot rockets into the United States, but I highly doubt it. What he's talking about when he says this, and I'm not sure if he is intentionally trying to deceive people in terms of the true purpose of this, but this is to stop nuclear weapons. Period, point blank. That's all this is for. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know if it's going to be space-based, which of course would entail the weaponization of space, which would be in defiance to the treaty, which I believe was signed in the 60s, that both the Russians and the Americans have already accused each other of violating for the last couple of years. Some suggesting that they've already put nuclear weapons up in space. How exactly do you intercept a missile that is traveling at Mach 20? It's virtually impossible if you don't get it in its stage 1 phase when it's slowest. And they do have systems in order to do that, but whether or not they could do that 1,000 times is another story. Likely not. They only have, I believe, a few dozen ABMs that even have a snowball's chance in hell of intercepting one ICBM. So when he's saying this, this is a statement to China and to Putin that we're getting ready for nuclear war. Understand that's what this is. And I might even have to title the video because Trump is getting ready for nuclear war. You see, on a tactical and short-term level, it might seem as though Trump is more well-meaning towards the Russians and more conciliatory in their strategy. But the grand strategy, taking Greenland, for example, so that you can militarize it even more and get your bombers closer to the Russians, whilst at the same time backing down from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Consider this trifecta of things that Trump is about to do, okay? He is about to weaponize Greenland. They already got a couple military bases there, but they're going to expand those. My guess is that they're going to be putting nukes in Greenland, either on bombers or in the ground, possibly, or on mobile platforms. That could be something new. They're going to do this Stargate thing. Okay, it's actually, was it quadfecta? I don't know what the word is. Anyways, so they're going to be putting nukes in Greenland for the most part. That's going to happen. F-35 stealth bombers, they have the range to get to certain targets within Russia from there. They're going to be putting nuclear weapons, Tomahawks, in Germany, okay, which have a range long enough to hit Moscow. They are going to now be building a missile defense system, and I don't think this is in defiance of any treaty per se, because the Russians have their S-500, S-550 platforms, but this will definitely be seen as an aggressive move towards the Chinese and the Russians, okay? So he's doing all those five things, weaponizing space, weaponizing Stargate, and rightly so, because the other side is doing it as well. Unfortunately, that means that we're rolling the dice with AI. They're going to be putting nukes in Greenland. They're going to be doing missile defense and nuclear forces in Germany, to name a few, okay? So all he's doing is really setting it up for the next president, for there to be a potential, like a real deal, right butting heads up again together, Cold War, especially if they create some sort of demarcation line in Ukraine that is being enforced by NATO troops. So now the good news is that maybe we've bought some time here, okay? Do not be a panic prepper. I have to say this over and over again, because so many people only prepare if they're afraid. And I get it. That has to be a motivation. In fact, fear is one of the most powerful motivating emotions, and it can motivate you to do amazing things in your life. Unfortunately, if you're a panic prepper who only preps because you think something is going to happen next week or next month, then you're going to burn yourself out when that ceases to happen. Enjoy the fact that maybe, and I'm not saying anything for sure, because shit could happen at any time. If these talks fail with Russia and Trump in spring, then things are going to get very scary, okay? But let's say we have a few years, guys. Let's say we have a few years. In the grand scheme of things, that's nothing compared to what the aftermath might look like. And that gives us enough time. You might not have the resources right now to go and get that off-grid property that you want. But if you have a few years, and what do you have to lose by working towards something like that? You already got your bug-out bag. You already got the means to go post-collapse nomad, right? Because that's usually where you start off with this thing in micro-preparedness, and eventually you kind of get established. Let's just say we have a few years. Think about what you could do with that time to get prepared for what might be coming. Now take a look at this map of Greenland for a second, just to put it in perspective. So this is a map of the top of the Earth. The top is relative, of course. You know, the top really isn't the top. In space, there's no up or down, but we say north is up and south is down anyways. NATO and Russia's militarization of the Arctic, military bases in the Arctic belonging to NATO and Russia. So you can see the Reds on that side. Russia is ready, right? Because they're going to have this North Sea route, which is going to allow them to bypass all of the shit and the Suez Canal and all that stuff. And they're going to be able to send their goods either to Europe, or they're going to be able to allow ships to come through here, and they're going to ice break. So they're going to be, I don't know if they're going to be charging fees for that or whatever. And then, you know, they can get to Asia as well, which is where 4.5 billion people are, the biggest market in the world, right? And as you can see, the United States already has Patuxent Air Force Base, Space Base, Greenland. Why would you put a space base in Greenland unless it was nuclear in nature? And then you have all these in, I believe this one is Alert. So this is in Canada. So this is Canada here. And now Denmark is getting ready to invest $2 billion, which is a lot for them, in the militarization of Greenland, and some EU countries are wanting to come to their defense. But I think at the end of the day, this is all theatrics, because I think most European leaders are probably aware of what's going on here, and it's the strategic encirclement of Russia. If you can get more nuclear assets here, then that could potentially enable you to do a more effective first strike, minimizing potential damage, retaliatory collateral damage, okay? So that's what's going on there. The president of Poland is saying that they want Nord Stream dismantled. Now, I don't know how this thing, which is rusting in the bottom of the ocean, is even going to be functional if they turn it back on. I know there's still one operational pipeline, which I can't see being turned back on at this rate, the rate that they are militarizing the Baltic Sea. There was another cable today, or was it yesterday, that was cut, and they're blaming it on a Chinese ship. Now, this is a lot of cables to just be accidentally cut. And for some reason, despite the fact that they're heavily militarizing the Baltic, they're not yet becoming too aggressive about its enforcement just yet. But I think that is coming. So next generation missile defense shield, pay attention to that, man, because that's bigger than what, arguably it's bigger than what Biden was doing in Ukraine in fighting Russians directly. Not in terms of shooting and allowing deep strikes into Russia. That was a bridge too far, obviously. But in terms of positioning ourselves to actually fight a war with the Chinese and the Russians, that's the Republican job, okay? And then they're just going to go back and forth in this tit for tat. We'll do this, you know, we'll play pretend, we'll go and shake Putin's hand and we'll make it all look nice. But in the background, we're going to be preparing like for World War III like we never have been before. Now, Lukashenko, say what you will about him, but he's in a position, I guess, where he can speak freely. So here's what he has to say. As an experienced politician, I have to say that I don't fully understand. This is the president of Belarus, by the way, and you know what will change in our region after Trump comes to power. Nothing will change. I'm trying to assess all of this, watching Russian television. Kostya, don't get involved in this. That wouldn't be very Belarusian. I'm not sure who he's talking to. Let me just see. I got to go back up a bit. They're all about Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump said this. Trump declared that. Trump stopped some aid for 90 days. Or suspended some joint programs. Calm down, everyone. It's all calculated. And the thing is, whether it's Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for Putin, whether it's Dmitry Medvedev, or any Russian pundit, they all say the same thing. They all say that the president is just a front man. And Putin has explicitly stated this. When he views a president, he knows that it's not them who are effectively making the decisions. It's the advisory board, which is informed by these appendages of the deep state, if you will, or just the zeitgeist of national security that take precedent over any sort of presidential executive orders. A brilliant artist, an actor, a showman, a businessman, and more, he says. He's really great at what he does. We know how to do these things, but with him, you see, his character is such that he's not shy about doing it. There are some things, even with my openness, that I'd be too shy to say, but not him. He's open. He's out there dancing, waving swords or whatever else. But listen, you're the president of such a country. You should think about how people on the other side of the screen are going to judge you. Now, essentially, what I got from that is that, just like I just said, that they know that this is mostly a show. Trump, goes a bit over and above what you typically would with a Western politician who is perhaps a bit more reserved and used to putting on a show. But at the end of the day, he's their adversary. And that's something to keep in mind at all times. This is a Latvian, I believe this image is actually Latvian in nature. And this is a row of fortifications being set up along the Latvian and Russian border. Okay, I presume it's on the Latvian side, not butted right up against the border. But they're getting ready for war. Okay, so anybody thinking, oh yeah, it's good times now, buy Fartcoin, you're delusional, man. You have no idea. No idea. This is game theory to the max. And FBI in Albany, they posted today that a large-scale multi-agency nuclear incident training exercise was taking place in Albany and Saratoga counties. The training exercise will not pose a risk to residents. Now, these nuclear exercises, they happen across the country all the time, which is why this is not a big headline. I just thought I'd throw it out there in light of the drone stuff that we're still waiting to hear about. Remember, Trump said on day one that he's going to be releasing that information. Well, we still don't have it yet. But he's a busy guy, so I'm sure, in good time, with enough pressure, we'll get an answer. What's next here? Yeah, so like I said, I'm not sure what this was about. It became an issue, and then they stopped adding new accounts that were Western-based accounts. So I'm not sure if this DeepSeek was attacked, and I still haven't figured out the logo. I'm sure there's some hidden message in there, the whale. I'm not sure what that's supposed to symbolize, but the Chinese are accelerating at pretty much everything in terms of bunker building, in terms of their ship building, in terms of automation. Industrial robot installations are above and beyond anything like all other countries combined. When we talk about our military spending, take every other metric in an industrial sense and apply it to China. They're killing us in automation. They're even killing us in Starlink. China beats Starlink with 10 times faster, 100 gigabyte per second space-ground laser transmission. Okay? Global consumer and drone manufacturers. DJI comprises 76%. All right? Intel is 4.1%. And I believe that's the only, and 3D Robotics, a company I've never even heard of. Okay? Yuntech I've heard of, but China dominates drones. And now they've already put out their 6th generation fighter craft. Whether it's any good, who knows? But why would we believe it wasn't? In terms of EVs, they completely dominate the EV space so much that they had to prevent you from being able to buy them because they would put us out of business. Okay? In terms of the top AI researchers, they are what? Like 20% of the global population, and they're putting out half of the world's top AI researchers, the chefs. Okay? They built more 5G base stations in 3 months than the US did in 2 years. Well, it's a controversial topic in our tinfoil circles. In fact, I've done videos on that before, but nonetheless, that's going to speed up and provide them more bandwidth in order to build out their grid. What do we excel at? Well, we excel at obesity and global antidepressant users per 1,000 people. 110 antidepressant users in the United States. China isn't even on here, man. All right? And I'm not like a Sino fanboy or anything like that. I'll tell you that you definitely probably don't want to be under an authoritarian rule by the Chinese. That said, I see a lot of images of, you guys have probably seen these images too, of people who refuse to sell their house to the state and they have to build these highways around these houses, and they have these all over China where they actually build around the person's house. So they might not have lots of rights, but they certainly do have some rights, right? But, you know, this is why SHTF is going to be so raucous, because when these meds stop flowing from, you guessed it, India and China, people are going to lose their minds. People are going to be very depressed. You're going to have a very high incidence of self-deletion. I think a lot of people are just going to voluntarily remove themselves from the gene pool when it gets too tough. And that's just antidepressants. That's not antipsychotics, anti-anxiolytics, which are anxiety medications, all of the other psychiatric cocktail of medications that just get shoved down people's necks because it's profitable. All of that shit is going to, and some of it's necessary. I'm not saying all of it's not necessary, but oftentimes we just want a quick fix, you know? Whether it's, what's the new thing that makes people lose weight? Ozempic? You know, whether it's that or anything. You know, we always want a quick fix. And that is part of the reason why China was able to excel with DeepSeek. Because when you don't have the luxury of resting on your laurels, you don't have this endless stream of chips and this endless amount of capital that the tech bros have been blessed with, you have to innovate, okay? And we've often criticized the Chinese as being unable to innovate, but very capable of copying and doing things at scale. And what they're showing us is that, well, you know, that pressure, you know, it's a trite remark, but it builds diamonds, right? So, and this is why, you know, you always, you know, struggle is never a bad thing, because it's the mother of all invention. Despite a slight retracement in gold today, which I believe was likely the result of people covering their margin calls, we had gold go up at Costco to $2,830. Usually, the price is about a couple percentage points above spot. The margins on gold suck. But the good thing is it's relatively easy to transport, and there's not a lot of transport costs with it in terms of, and you know, you make $100 maybe selling that. But yes, Costco is still selling gold, and for the most part, gold is holding its ground today, okay? So, yeah. Just FYI, guys, if you want to support the channel, check out CanadianPreparedness.com. PV Mart, which is a Canadian company, is closing all its stores, okay? And I'm telling you this, we're entering a very, very austere time in the year ahead. And the store, you know, it helps me employ people here. It's not the most profitable endeavor, I'll tell you that right now. Everybody thinks I'm just trying to sell stuff, quite frankly, and I don't know how many times I've said this. If I didn't do this and I just did affiliate marketing and I did endorsements, I would be way richer than I am. But because I love the gear, and because I also want to get people good quality gear, and you'll not find any junk, any subpar quality. Yeah, it's a bit more expensive, but it is what it is. We also have this cool tool on here that allows you to do your survival rating. And no, we don't keep your data. We keep it in aggregate because we want to use it to better inform the study. But I have no interest in knowing who you are or selling this to the government. I know even if I say that, people are going to, you know, think that I'm lying, but I quite frankly could give a shit, okay? I got too much else to think about. But it asks you to ask you a bunch of questions, then it gives you a score, like kind of like a credit score, and everybody's gonna be, oh, he's promoting the social credit score. No, this is going to give you a ballpark as to how you fare against the rest of the population in terms of your survivability. So it asks you things like, you know, let's just say, okay, your financial net worth. So you just put something in there. How experienced are you in gardening? What zone are you in? So it shows you the different types of zones. So obviously, the more north you are, the lower you're going to score on this particular part. How much experience do you have in gardening? How large is your garden? Mine's actually quite large now. What is your level of experience in hunting? We'll say intermediate. What is your level of, or that was fishing. Yeah, fishing is intermediate. animal husbandry, total novice at that. Are you close to a densely populated region? And so on and so forth. And, you know, it asks you all these questions, and then it's going to churn out, and I'm just selecting things at random here. So it's somewhat accurate, but not entirely. And I will say, anyways, go and take the test, and maybe it'll help you. I don't know. It's not at all related to trying to sell you things at the store. It's just an extra tool that we've added. I've done a video on it before, and I guess my goal was to try to give people some framework that they can improve in terms of increasing their survivability score over time. So these are things that you can improve upon. If you have 4+ skilled trades, I mean, you're getting top scores in that particular area. If you have had combat experience before, you're going to score very high. If you have martial arts training, do you have a surveillance system? Do you have a guard dog, etc., etc.? So it talks about all these things, and which is why I can see this is the problem when you're trying to provide services to preppers. I know how guarded and insular we are in our ability to remain anonymous, and I totally respect that. At the same time, I want to try to leverage some of these tools for people. So it's there. If you want to use it, go check it out. And like I said, we have a very comprehensive selection of survival gear, everything you could imagine, from the warmest coats on earth, to other survival knickknacks, Geiger counters, personal protective equipment, body armor, the list goes on and on, all right? Now, let's get to the fun stuff. I think I showed this before, but Russia stands to gain like trillions and trillions of dollars. All of the resource-rich land in Ukraine is right around here, the stuff that they control, and it's about $15 trillion worth of stuff. And so Putin is trying to make the argument that, hey, we're going to make up for this in a few months. This is some game. What the hell is it called? Inzoi? Okay, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Second Life. It was like a sim game, sort of, where you existed in this virtual world, which was kind of, you could have property in the world, but the graphics really sucked. It was like back in 2010 or something. This is that, only the next step with modern graphics. Okay, so let's check this out. I'll spare you the shitty audio, generic audio. So basically, it's like The Sims on steroids. So imagine, you have your character, your avatar, and so just imagine you're eating your bugs in your pod, right? Because you can only afford a tiny home or a van or something, and this is your life. So as the cost of homes becomes basically insurmountable for most people, you're going to be able to own the biggest home you want, only it's going to be in the virtual world. And you're going to experience this through your virtual headset. This might not be quite there yet, but that's what they're going for. They want you to live in the matrix to make up for all the shortcomings that are going to be our reality in the real world. And so you can see people having conversations. I'm sure they're going to employ AI. There's going to be, different types of physics. And it's going to be very similar to The Sims, only it's going to be a massive multiplayer online experience type dealio, okay? And you're going to have your virtual girlfriend who's not going to look anything like what her avatar says. We've all been there before, right? Anyways. Oh yeah, so Donald Trump is all about that ethnic cleansing. So he's going to be encouraging the deportation of the Gazan people out of the Gaza Strip, apparently. But you never know what you hear. Believe half of what you hear and half of what you see, or whatever the fuck. None of what you hear and half of what you see. This is Iran's new drone, which seems to resemble a Reaper drone, the one that they shot down or brought down with a cyber attack, I believe, a few years ago, 10 years ago or so, and they're calling it Gaza. So the Iranians, you know, they keep making advancements in conventional weapons tech, and seems like it packs a punch. Like, let's just see. So it's got what appear to be about a dozen of these missiles that carry a pretty sizable ordnance. And but remember, the Houthis are shooting these things down left and right, so I presume that, you know, we'll be able to shoot these down left and right. But if you get an onslaught of this and all the ICBMs and everything, then you're definitely potentially looking at trouble. In terms of overvaluations in the markets, the Magnificent Seven, as you can see here for comparison. I'm not sure what the metric is here. Is this times the baseline? This is not Shiller PE ratio. I'm not sure what this is measuring, but you can see in relative terms the Nifty 50 bubble, the internet bubble, and the Magnificent Seven. So that's the top 7 tech stocks in terms of their average overbought overvaluation. It's incredibly high at this time. This is why I always encourage people, if you do have any sort of spare funds that you can't put into, you know, material things like solar panels, there's no more sound investment from my point of view that has no counterparty risk than gold and even silver to a degree. But silver, because it's such an industrial metal, it's going to see more fluctuations with the market. But on the whole, you know, I would say that silver demand is high and it's going to be very high into the future. I've done a brief documentary on that recently. This is U.S. net capital inflows from foreigners. Okay, so this is what's propping up the stock market right now. All right. What's propping up the stock market right now is foreign investment. And so without that foreign investment, you can see during times of recession, like in 2020, everybody jumped ship out of the American dollar. Or this is 2020. So, this would be the recession here. This was in 2021 after the Wall Street bets and when things started to kind of fall apart. That's when people got out, right? People went into the U.S. economy because it was a safe haven at the time because they thought the world was ending. The U.S. dollar was going higher because people wanted dollars. They didn't know what was going to happen. But typically during recessionary periods, and I'm not sure if this is always standard, but there's a downward trend in terms of foreign investment in the United States. Right now, it is riding high, which might signal that we're in a period of danger. Because of course, just like COVID, you know, was uncertainty, people want the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry basket. Egg prices hit an all-time high. This is why you can never go wrong stockpiling food, especially in a freeze-dried form. Now, of course, this price is likely going to come down because it's largely due to the culling of birds. It's partly seasonal, I imagine, as well. But you can see there's definitely a trend upwards, okay? And I mean, bird flu started around here, and there's been a trend upwards with a brief reprieve in 2015 to 2020, but which has quickly been made up for. So we're seeing egg prices, I've seen $15 USD in some places. I don't know where that was, but it's not good. And all that beef, that freeze-dried food you might have bought from us 2 years ago, nowadays, I mean, you've already made your money back. Freeze-dried, you pay a premium because of the energy that goes into the freeze-drying process. But just like gold, you know, it's one of those things that it increases in price. And so if you do pay a premium on it, you end up making up for it with the gains that you make. A Wall Street regulator is understating margin debt by more than $4 trillion. So hedge funds borrow money to invest in the stock market. So the actual amount of margin debt or debt that is specifically allocated to invest in stocks is much higher than they're saying. And that goes back to this graph that I showed you here. This is only 1/4 of the story. The debt that people are using to invest is much higher. And that was one of the main things that precipitated the 1929 stock market crash. because when it started to crash, people had to start to pay their debts. And when they couldn't pay their debts, they defaulted. And that caused, just a chain reaction of collapse. There was an incident on the US-Mexican border today where border guards were fired upon by cartels, apparently. I don't know much about the story, but I think this is something that we're going to see more often and may likely metastasize into some sort of direct confrontation with the US military and these cartels. And I actually think that maybe there's elements within the Mexican government that would like the help, to be brutally honest. But they're just maybe too afraid to ask. I don't know. I don't know enough about the situation. This is the S&P 500 equity risk premium. So it's approaching the lows of 2000. So that means that it's less, how can you say, there's less of an incentive to invest because there's too much risk. And so that was the case in 2000 when we had the dot-com bubble, and we're quickly approaching. So a lot of these indicators, I mean, they're all pointing towards the obvious. It's got to go in the other direction at some point. A new strain of H5, I believe it was N9, Eurasian lineage, goose, Guangdong clade, and this is where I'm going to totally shit the bed in terms of explaining this, were confirmed in a commercial duck premises in Merced County, California. This is the first confirmed case of this particular type of strain, of course, but one of thousands of outbreaks at this point. I think we can safely say thousands of outbreaks across the country. What else we got here? Okay, so this is just something important for people to realize, okay? So this is Arctic sea ice thickness back in the 80s, okay? So this is why the Russians are, basically spending all that money in the Arctic, because it's halved. It's nearly down 50% just in the last 45 years. And so when all of this ice melts, that reduces something called the albedo effect, which is the sun being reflected away from the Earth because there's more white on the Earth. White reflects light back into space. And if there is no Arctic ice, that means the actual warming accelerates. And so it's a positive feedback loop, okay? And that's why you're seeing situations like this in Europe, where I know we recently had some crazy weather here, but on the whole, it is much warmer. I mean, Europe just doesn't get winter anymore. Right now, case in point, they are in some places 10 degrees Celsius above average. And it's been like this pretty much all summer. So this is why, the war would likely be fought much differently. And this is something that doesn't get enough attention. The last 3 years have been unusually warm in Ukraine. And maybe if the ground was a little bit harder and less muddy, maybe we would see more aggressive big arrow maneuver warfare that they simply can't do because they're contending. It really favors the defenders in a way, because in order to get expeditionary forces, you're going to get stuck in the mud. Whereas you can dig in and defend, but you just can't, make many big advances. So that's what's going down there. I just thought this was an interesting graphic for people. And one thing that I've always been irritated by, when people say, oh, I just can't afford to have kids, right? So people are going to say, oh, you're promoting climate change, you're against depopulation, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not. I say try to have as many kids as you can because we're pretty much screwed either way, okay? Back in 1790, it was an average, and I'm not sure if this was the States or where this was, it was somewhere in the West, 6 people per 831 square feet of house. 1850, about 5.5 people for a slightly bigger house, right? 1910, about 4.5 people for an even bigger house, 945 square feet. 1970, that we all regard as one of the ass ends of the 20th century from an American point of view, 3.1 people per 1,500 square feet. So for perspective, that's like 4 times the amount of space as they had in 1790. Now fast forward to today, where you have 2.5 people occupying 2,500 square feet. And that's a big house, 2,500 square feet, especially if you include the basement, which we have a lot of here. I'm not sure if you guys have many down there. But, you know, just puts it in perspective. You know, there never was. If this isn't a good time to have kids and it's too expensive, there never was a good time because it's cheaper now by all accounts. Now, it's not cheaper if you're, depending on, you know, what standard you're trying to achieve. But one of the great things about when you do become a parent is that you find that you're more productive. And they've actually done studies to show that married people with children actually make more money because you're willing to work more. You realize that you have people depending on you. There's all kinds of ways to make it work. And honestly, kids really aren't that expensive. It's totally overblown. I mean, when you get daycare out of the way, it's up to you, really, you know, how much you want to spend. If you want to buy them designer clothes and all this shit, then, you know, that's on you. But you don't need to do that, right? And there's so much hand-me-down throwaway stuff. Like, we're such a consumption-driven society. I go to, you know, donate clothes to these places, and the clothes that they're getting are like designer clothes nowadays. So, you know, it ain't that bad is what I'm trying to say. All right. But anyways, that's what I got to report today, my friends. Keep an eye on this AI thing because it's going to make for an interesting few months. Don't be surprised, though, if it kind of fizzles out in the media and then it's going to surge back with a vengeance. I don't think this is the same as the dot-com bubble. I think many lessons were learned from that point, and clearly the reason why they're investing so much is because of the weaponization aspect and for its potential to build out these virtual worlds. And another term, I guarantee you, mark my words, I always leave the gems until the end. A term that you're going to start hearing a lot more about again are NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And the reason why is because we're entering an era where you're going to buy virtual real estate in the form of an NFT. And I believe that the NFTs that we were exposed to a few years ago, that was just the 2D surface level stuff. The real purpose of NFTs is ownership over virtual real estate. And because in the future, next month, there's going to be a video game and they're going to advertise in that game. And you're going to see massive multiplayer online games, and there's going to be a billboard. And you're going to be able to either buy that billboard, right, which is going to get exposed to so many people per day. And they're probably going to do this in Grand Theft Auto 6. And you're going to actually be able to buy certain parts of the game, but not just, you know, in your own game, but something that other people will also be exposed to. So I think that's coming. It's not too far off. And people are going to pay for it. And, you know, Second Life gave that whole thing a trial run. And I think this may not be the iteration that catches people, but we're not too far. We're not too far from the Matrix, particularly with AGI's ability to generate worlds in real time. That's where it's all moving. But for that, you need compute. You need electricity, and that's what they're all gunning for. On the one hand, they're going to make weapons, but they're also going to make distractions so that we all just go to sleep in our pods while the powers that be fight it out with each other in cyberspace and quite possibly on the nuclear front. And they're going to have their lavish underground bunkers. And by that point, we're already going to be living in our own prison or bunker of sorts. Because most people just live in the dark nowadays anyways. It's depressing, isn't it? to know that some people who just sit in front of a computer all day, they wouldn't know whether they were 50 feet underground or on the surface. And they probably wouldn't even care. You know, maybe they need to go and stretch out their feet, but nowadays with high definition screens and who knows what sort of holodecks they're going to be creating in order to simulate those experiences in the virtual space, it's going to be more and more realistic. You know, we're almost there, folks. So if you're a fellow Terran like I am, do not be a technophobe, because you don't want to let this stuff escape you, because you need to be able to speak the language, because it's going to, if we enter cyberpunk, your survival is going to depend on understanding the technology. And even from an entrepreneurial point of view, you know, we need to not shy away from this tech, because you're not stopping it. You're not going to stop the Iron Horse, and you're not going to stop the virtual Iron Horse, which is what this is. Anyways, my friends, if you want to support the channel, please go and support us at CanadianPreparedness.com. We got everything there you could possibly need for prepping. Canadian Prepper out.